Good morning, everybody. Sorry, starting a little late this morning. It's Monday. It's 11 o'clock, and I'm starting my Facebook Live. I'm going to talk about estimating net operating income today. Why is net operating income important? Net operating income is basically your, in other business you would call it that's your net income, right? Net operating income is a basis for calculating most of the indices or most of the parameters that we use to evaluate portfolios. Like I like to use cap rate. Some people I like to use cash on cash. Other people like IRR. In most of those cases, you're going to need to know what your net operating income is, and you're going to need to know that fairly accurately to be able to evaluate what your rental property is worth, or what the rental property that you're about to buy is worth. Net operating income is basically your rents minus all of your operating expenses. But it's the number that you get with all of the expenses taken out minus the but before the rent. So let me jump into. I prepared a couple of slides to help with the to facilitate the conversation. So let's look at them really quickly. So when I look at my properties, when I'm evaluating a property to purchase, or it is actually a portfolio of properties, it's 10 plus single family homes that I buy to cash flow. I use a three-stage approach, kind of. I use a rule of thumb to really quickly look at the property and decide, is this even worth spending the time on? Is this worth writing an offer on? And if the rule of thumb looks good, then I will actually write my initial offer based on that. And if I get a bite, great. If I don't get a bite, no problem, move on to the next one. Then if it looks like the seller might be interested, they're usually not going to be interested at the number that I gave them, because I usually come in pretty aggressively. Then I will switch to a more detailed estimate, and I will use a spreadsheet to estimate what the net operating income is going to be. Last week somebody asked me, hey, what is the net operating, how do you calculate this, and how do you calculate that? How do you factor in for vacancies? How do you factor in for evictions? So I put together a really quick NOI estimator that I'm going to share with you guys today. And if you're interested in getting a copy of it, please send me an email, and I will gladly share that file with you. And then the final stage is once the deal has been signed, so once we've reached an agreement on the price, I will go into a due diligence phase, and that is a much more involved process that takes hours and hours and hours. And that's why I will usually not agree, or I will usually not give the seller what they ask, then go into due diligence and then try and negotiate from that point, because A, the sellers will usually not be super willing to negotiate at that point, and B, I would end up sinking 50 hours of my own time in due diligence, and I don't want that to be wasted if the deal disappears, or if the deal is broken. Now, do we find stuff during due diligence? Absolutely. Do we have to renegotiate? Sometimes. Do we kill deals if the seller is not willing to work? Absolutely. Just in the last 2 months, I spent I don't know, 100 to 150 hours of my time doing due diligence on a deal in Cleveland, which was 52 properties, 32 single family, then a few fourplexes, duplexes, and during due diligence, we found that the net operating income that the seller has initially thought they were getting was off by $6,000 a month, which killed the deal. So that deal was canceled, and back to square one. But that's cost of doing business. So I want to go back into the presentation, and let's take a look at what my rule of thumb is. And I've already talked about it before when I did my video on single family versus multifamily. So on a single family property, I will assume net operating income to be 60 to 65% of the scheduled rents. Now, I just learn something new every day. I've just in the last week I've learned that if you're going to buy something in Chicago, the property taxes there are significantly higher than everywhere else, and 60% might not be enough. It might have to be closer to 55% or even 50% of net operating income. I'll talk about it a little bit later when we get into the estimator. On a multifamily, only 45% of your net operating income is going to become, of your scheduled rents is going to become your net operating income, and that's due to the fact that you're going to have more maintenance and recurring expenses on an apartment building. And we've talked about it in the past as well. I'm also going to talk about it today. So let's go to the next slide. So let's say you had a property. Let's consider a property they want $1 million for it. It's cash flowing. The gross rents are $200,000. Using this rule, you're going to have a net operating income of about $120,000. So let's say that math works for you. What do you do next? You write an offer. Let's say they've accepted your offer. What's next? Let's take a look at the estimating net operating income. So now a little bit of math, but nothing super heavy. None of the math is difficult or complicated. It's surprising how many people don't do it right, though. I just had an interesting experience. I own some properties in Grace Harbor County, and I was looking at let me switch it back to my face. I was actually got an email from my agent, and it was a 10-unit apartment building in a small community, kind of halfway between Aberdeen and Olympia, and they want $950,000 for a 10-unit apartment building, and I look at it, and the gross schedule rents are about $110,000. The stated net operating income in the listing is $90,000. I'm like, there is no way this could be true. So I email my agent and I say, hey, could you please ask them how they calculated the net operating income? And the reply comes in from the other agent is like, oh, I've used the formula in MLS and I put all the numbers in there and it's right. And she's really condescending. And so I asked, well, can you tell me which expenses were there? And she comes back and she says, well, we have insurance expense in there and water, sewer, and garbage. I'm like, okay, well, if you don't mind me asking, who pays property taxes, who pays management, who pays, what is the vacancy, who pays maintenance, who pays capex, who pays common area maintenance, and the agent came back after a day, and again, super condescending, and she forgot to mention property taxes at all again, but she was like, this is a really high demand area. The properties are never vacant. If they're vacant, you're mismanaging them. I think you should self-manage it, therefore that's free. And the property is almost brand new, so it's low maintenance, so you don't have to spend any money on maintenance. I was like, here's your ticket, right? So, and that is supposed to be a real estate professional who is marketing a multifamily property. So that just shows you not everybody who is called real estate professional is professional, and a lot of the folks who get involved with multifamily know that much about rental business. So now, having said that, let's take a look at what should be included in your net operating income calculations. So generally, NOI equals scheduled rents minus operating expenses. And in my business, at least, I budget for the following operating expenses. And that would be vacancy and evictions. That we could do half an hour video just on that. But generally, no property is ever 100% vacant always. So there is always vacancy. Now, the length of that vacancy is going to depend on how good your property management company is and how good of a market you're in. So if there is a line of people already waiting to move into your unit and the property management is right on the spot, in other words, they get the notice that the tenant is going to move out, they do a pre-move out inspection, they identify the items that need to be fixed, they schedule the contractors ahead of time for the day after the tenant moves out to go in and fix those items, they can turn that property in a week, which is going to be awesome. Now, your tenant has to be, the new tenant has to be able to move in and actually pay you money within that week, or they can collect the money from them from that point. It's not easy to turn a house in a week. Most property management companies will not be able to do it quite that efficiently. Now, we're also budgeting, so when we're budgeting 5 to 6%, the way I look at it is I look at how much time are we giving ourselves per property, and that translates to about 3/4 of a month per property. So we're talking 3 weeks. But those 3 weeks, if translated in money, should also include the placement cost and a little bit for evictions. That shouldn't happen that often. So if you are truly if your tenants in your property really moving every year, 5 to 6% is not enough, because that 5 to 6% is a budget or an allowance for empty time that the property is not collecting rents between tenants, for the property management placement fee, which often can be half to a full month rent, plus some kind of a accumulation budget for evictions. So do the analysis on your market, do the analysis on your property management, talk to the property management companies that you're going to use. My general observation in the market has been, the farther the property management company away from your house, the longer it's going to take them to turn the unit, because they're not going to show it to prospective tenants live as soon as they show up. They're going to try and pool 5 or 6 people for showing on the same day because they have to drive for an hour, and generally they lose efficiency with distance. So, okay, enough about vacancies for now. Property taxes. Again, I usually use a simple 2 to 5% of the gross schedule rents as a holding budget. As I just learned in Chicago, that might not be enough. Here's the thing. Property taxes are calculated of the assessed property value, not of the of gross rents. And so, depending on where that assessed property value is and the tax rate for the state, you might be paying more or less than that. Management, generally 8% is what I budget. We'll talk more about management in a little bit. 1 to 2% for insurance. Again, if it's a single house and you're buying homeowners insurance, it's going to be more than that because it's based on the value. As a portfolio operator, we would usually get insurance that is created or kind of designed for that type of business, and it's generally much higher deductible, but it's going to be lower per year cost. I usually budget 5 to 7% a year for maintenance and 5 to 7% for capital expenditures, capex, capital improvements. That is generally enough. Again, if your per door rents are very low, then you might want to be closer to 7% or maybe even higher. If your per door or rents are fairly high, then it's going to be less, and here's why. Replacing a toilet, let's say, is $200, and that cost is not going to change whether you're getting $400 a month in rent or $1,200 in rent a month, but it's going to be a much higher percentage of that gross rent. Again, you shouldn't have a maintenance event every month, so it's more of a accumulation budget. I would expect a single house that's kind of in 70s to maybe throw off 2 to 3 events a year. any more than that, and you kind of need to start looking at other things. What else can be done to do we need to go in and fix the property, or what else are we doing? All right. Water, sewer, garbage. Generally, on a single-family house, I would expect the tenant to pay that, but again, from market to market, it changes. So if there is a water, sewer, garbage fee, make sure to incorporate it. And then the last three items: common utilities, common area, and maintenance. Those would be specific to apartment buildings. And then contingency, depending on, that is your chance to add a premium, because let's say it's a riskier market. Let's say it's a really rural community and you feel your vacancy might be higher, or if you think you're going to have one eviction a year, that would be the place to budget it. So, okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay. The NOI estimator. So I mentioned that I put together this little spreadsheet. It works really easy. I'm actually going to switch to Excel right now and show how it works. So you have your ask price, offer price, and then the tax assessment value. Right now it just equalizes to the offer price. And that just gives you the basis for calculating some of the items. Gross rent is the important number. You just type that in. So let's say, as I said in our example, we said, let's say we're offering $1 million, and the gross rents are $200,000. So we budget for 6% vacancy, and you can tweak this to, let's say, 8, or let's go to 5 instead. Say it's a nice area, we expect nicer. Right. Property taxes, let's bump it up to 5. I'm thinking of Chicago. Management will leave at 8%. Insurance is 1. Maintenance 5. Capex 5, and then all of the others are paid by the tenant. So your $88,000 a year is going to be your operating expenses, and then your NOI is going to be $102,000, which is 51% of your gross rents. Now, that is because of the property taxes. So it actually breaks the rule of thumb. If your property taxes stay within 4%, then you're at 56, close to 56. Hope that helps. In Washington, I always budgeted 3. Now, going to some of the East Coast, or like Illinois, Chicago, I'm learning that's not enough. So do a quick research, find out what property taxes are for your market. Now, if any of you want a copy of this NOI estimator, I'm more than happy to share. Send me an email to peter@choiceforhomes.com saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, I would like to get a copy of your NOI estimator, and I'll gladly send you this file. Most of the cells are kind of protected. You can only enter values in this box right here. And that's general, and that's done so the formulas aren't broken. All right. Moving on. Okay, next slide. Due diligence. So let's say you've done your NOI estimation, you zeroed in on what is the absolute maximum you're willing to pay for the property. You've negotiated, and finally you agreed on the price with the seller, and you have a purchase and sale agreement in place. Most of my contracts that I write, I try to get at least 60 days for due diligence and 21 days for closing. I use leverage for most of my deals. I'll finance 75% of the purchase price, and then I'll use a joint venture partner for the down payment. Once due diligence starts, that's when I actually start spending time, and later in the process I start spending money on the property. In my previous video, when we talked about purchasing costs, I talked about paying for the inspection and paying for the appraisals, and those would happen as soon as I've done the desktop version. So the desktop due diligence review is what's on the screen right now, and that basically is going to talk about, I'm going to go into what are the basic documents and how does the property actually performing, and if the numbers still look good, if they're still within the budget that you gave yourself with that, and through your NOI calculator, then you could probably move on to closing, or first move on to paying for the inspection and then move on to paying for the appraisal. So let's talk about it. First, property taxes. Get the actual property taxes. Go on the county website, figure out what they paid last year. Good rule of thumb, property taxes never go down, they always go up. Now, on a declining market, that might be reversed, but generally, don't expect, if the seller is telling you, oh, we always dispute property taxes and we always get an exemption, I would not base my math on that. It's not a safe assumption. So go get your actual property taxes for each property that you're buying off, and look at what the property taxes were doing in the past. Has that particular municipality or county, do they have a history of raising property taxes constantly? Validate rents, vacancies, and expenses. You're going to ask for the following documents from your seller. Rent rolls, lease agreements, tenant ledgers, profit and loss statements, and owner statements, which could be same as profit and loss. And if not, then the owner statements for the last 3 months, 3 or 4 months. What are the rent rolls? Rent rolls is basically a list of all of the properties with who the tenant, the name of the tenant that lives there, when their lease starts and when it ends, and how much are they paying per month. That's a great roadmap to everything else that you're going to be doing. Lease agreements. They should have a copy of the signed lease for every unit, for every tenant, and when you get those, read through them. Look for items that look for language that says who pays what. Does the tenant, or is tenant responsible for all of the water, sewer, garbage? Is the tenant responsible for doing the loan, removing snow? All of that is cost, and you want to make sure you know who is responsible for paying that cost, because if it's you as a future landlord, then you need to budget for that. Deposits. Your rent roll should have a column on it that says deposit held and the number in it, and if it doesn't, look at the leases. If the tenant paid the security deposit when they moved in, that is not the landlord, that's their money. You don't own that money, or the current landlord doesn't own that money. So if you're unaware, if there is a, let's say, $10,000 of deposits sitting in escrow, or not sitting in escrow, but lease-wise they've been paid, then when those tenants move out, you're going to be on the hook for either paying those deposits or doing, or coming up with the repairs that the tenant has to pay for the amount. The bottom line is, the reason it's important to understand about the deposits is because the deposits need to be moved over from the current, or from the seller to you as part of the closing. Again, if they start saying, well, that's not that's not part of the agreement, or it's not part of the price, that the response should be, it's not your money, it's the money you're holding on behalf of the tenant. You should be transferring it over because the tenant is going to want that money back eventually. And then understand late fees and other things that might be in that contract. Do they pay late fees? And then later on, when you talk to the management, who gets those late fees? Do you get them, or do the management company gets them? Are they split somehow? So you want to understand as much of it as possible, because your lease is basically the document that governs who pays what and how. Review tenant ledgers. What are the tenant ledgers? Tenant ledgers is a ledger that the management company keeps, and that is the part of their documentation with the tenant. And it basically says, so-and-so paid X number of dollars on such date, and that is towards this month's rent or next month's rent. The tenants might be prepaying, the tenants might be paying in 3 installments, whatever. You want to see those, because between the tenant ledger, the rent roll, and the lease agreement, all 3 of those should work together. And if they don't, you need to research further. And then the last two statements, the profit and loss statement is usually an annual spreadsheet that shows an annual breakdown on how much money were spent for each expense item, including maintenance, maybe capital improvements and things like that. And then the owner statements, those are monthly, same information on a monthly basis. Those are going to be your basis for estimating the costs. Right? You want to look at how much money were they spending on maintenance, and is it within your budgeted amounts. Now, if they're spending too little on maintenance, that's also a red flag, because it means they're not maintaining their properties, and so when you buy them, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you will need to fix. So those are the rents. Next step, validate management costs. And the way I do it is I'll start calling. I'll go on internet. I'll Google property management for that area. I'll get a list of 5, 6, 10 property management companies. Sometimes I use Worry as a resource. In some markets there will be a list of recommended property management companies. And then what I do is I create a spreadsheet which lists all of the property addresses, monthly rents, and that's about it. And I'll send that spreadsheet to whoever I'm talking to, and I will actually call those management companies and I'll have a conversation with them. And during that phone call, I'm going to talk about several things, but one of them is going to be I'm going to ask them about the area and whether they like those, whether they want to manage those properties. And that is a good indication for me whether they, if the property management says, oh yeah, great, no problem, we have plenty of houses in that area, we'll work, we're glad to take them, that means the area is decent. If they come back with something like, well, we really don't like this area, but we'll go there just for you, then again you might want to at least budget some extra vacancy and some extra risk into your model. And then the other thing I talk to them about is the cost, of course. And there are three main things property management companies make their money on. It's your monthly maintenance or monthly management fees, it's your placement costs, and your maintenance markup. So you generally, if you have a package of 10 doors or more, you can negotiate to have the monthly fee to be about 8%, maybe 7.5%, depending on the market. If you use somebody nationwide, you might be able to go even lower, but then you'll be trading away for some services. Placement costs. Every time a tenant moves out, the property management company will have to manage the rotation. They'll have to sign a contract. They'll have to show the property. There's cost associated with that, and they will most of them will start with a 1 full month rent. I usually and I've been successful at getting half a month's rent. If you have enough properties, again, that's why I don't like buying houses one at a time, because then you're going to be paying full month's rent, and you are going to be paying 10% management cost, not 8. When you're swinging a bigger package, 10 doors or more, all of a sudden now you are more of an attractive client for those property management companies, and they'll give you sweet deals. And the maintenance markups. You want to make sure that there is no flat per visit cost, or I don't mind them marking up labor, but I don't like materials being marked up and so on. Either way, whatever the property management company is going to charge you, you may or may not be able to negotiate away or down, but you should always have it budgeted for. You'll adjust your numbers by those actuals. So, and then the final call is, of course, the insurance company. Call them, ask them how much they're going to charge you for this portfolio. If you're working with a big portfolio insurance provider who provides insurance for portfolios, you might not have to call them. You might have a blanket contract where you can just go online and add 10 addresses, and they become automatically covered and added to your policy and to your bill. And if you have that, it's a really sweet thing, and you'll usually saves a lot of time, and you know what your costs are up front. Okay. So that's approximately what I look at when I'm doing due diligence on a package of properties. So, if you have any questions on this, this is my contact information. You can email either to Peter at Choice for Homes or info at Choice for Homes. If you want a copy of my calculator, NOI calculator, email to Peter at Choice for Homes, and I'll get it out today. Once again, This is Peter, Choice of Home Investment Solutions. I haven't decided what I'm going to talk about next week yet. One of the ideas I have, maybe talk about difference between cap rate, cash on cash, return on investment, what do they mean and how do they affect properties. But again, something might happen this week that will give me a better idea, and I'll come up with that. Again, if you are interested and you want to see, want to hear me talk about something, email me or leave a comment, and I will gladly look at ideas for future presentations. Once again, I will save a copy of this on YouTube. A copy of this video is going to be on my Choice for Homes Investment Solutions Facebook page. Like us, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you like the content. If you don't like the content, write me a note and say, hey, I didn't like your last video and this is why, and I'll try and fix that. So anyway, until next week, bye.